Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our webinar where we will discuss the new Biden administration and Turkey-US relations. Next week, Joe Biden will be inaugurated as the President of the United States, and a new era for American foreign policy will start. In recent years, it is no secret that US-Turkey relations have been troubled due to disagreements over bilateral and regional issues. Nevertheless, expectation is that these changes could be an opportunity for the United States and Turkey to reset relations and explore opportunities for a more constructive collaboration. We are thrilled to be hosting a very high-level and distinguished panel today. I would like to welcome our distinguished guests. It's an honor and a pleasure to have with us today former Foreign Minister of Spain and Atlantic Council board member Ana Palacio, former Ambassador of the UK to the US, France and Turkey, and Atlantic Council Future of Europe Initiative Distinguished Fellow Sir Peter Westmacott, former Special Representative for Syria Engagement and the Special Envoy to the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS, and former US Ambassador to Turkey, James Jeffrey, Center for Economics and Foreign Policy Studies, Chairman Sinan Ülgen, and former US Ambassador to Azerbaijan and Atlantic Council Eurasia Center and Global Energy Center Senior Fellow, Matt Bryza, to moderate the panel. Without further ado, I'm happy to pass the floor to my friend and colleague, Matt, who will be moderating the panel. Matt, floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, dear Daphne. It's I can't imagine a more insightful, experienced panel of real giants to talk about this topic than we have. And these are people, at least personally, for my entire professional career, I have either loved working for or learning from, collaborating with, and even admiring from afar. But before we get into it, we have a few housekeeping issues to take care of. Number one, this is on the record, an on-the-record event. Number two, please engage with Twitter. The Twitter handles will appear in the chat box. Grady Wilson will share those with us, but they're at AC_Istanbul is one, or the other one is at Atlantic Council. Don't worry, you'll see them in the chat box. You should have received, all registered guests at least, bios of all the panelists, and yours truly as well. And then finally, at the end of the session, or at the end of the panel discussion, we'll have a question and answer session. So please submit your questions through the Q&A box. Please include your title, your affiliation, and of course your name, because we can't handle anonymous questions. Since we anticipate a lot of questions, maybe you could begin submitting those questions even now, and we hope to get to as many of them as possible. Thanks so much. Well, we begin this session at a really somber moment for us Americans. And thanks to the insurrection at the US Capitol on January 6th, we live in a different world today than we did when we were planning this event just a couple of weeks ago. So that raises a whole series of questions now, this impending impeachment of President Trump and this attack on American democracy. Will Washington, especially the Senate, be so consumed now with President Trump's second impeachment trial that there simply will not be space for serious thinking about US-Turkey relations? How long will it take for President Biden to get his senior foreign policy team confirmed? Or will maybe Washington's obsession with impeachment could possibly provide an opportunity for those senior members of the Biden team that don't require Senate confirmation, say National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan, to get to work, maybe on pursuing a new US-Turkey strategic partnership, but under the political radar? But will they even want to, given how negative Turkey's brand is now in Washington? And just a couple of hours ago, Bloomberg reported that President Erdogan just announced that Turkey is in talks with Russia to buy a second S-400 system, and that Turkey doesn't take directions from NATO on weapons purchases. So is that going to have an impact and be an obstacle in improving US-Turkey relations? Additionally, we all know that Presidents Trump and Erdogan have had a close and personal relationship. So does President Trump's departure ensure a rockier start to US-Turkish relations at the outset of the Biden administration? On the other hand, Looking forward to a Biden presidency, it seems President Erdogan has recently extended olive branches to the US as well as to the European Union. And this happened despite those recent US sanctions against Turkey for its initial, I hope only, S-400 purchase. Does this mark a genuine and enduring shift in Turkish foreign policy? Could it open a way for the US and Turkey and the US, EU and Turkey and the UK as well to recognize their overlapping strategic interests? These include securing a unified and stable Iraq and Syria, countering Russian and Iranian military adventurism, expanding east-west transport corridors that link Central Asia and the South Caucasus with Turkey and Europe, and thereby compete with China's Belt and Road Initiative, ending the regional rift in the Gulf, and finally promoting NATO's entire mission set, relying on the alliance's two largest militaries, the US and Turkey, and now on Turkey's innovative drone-related technologies and tactics. And at the same time, might the UK possibly seek a triangular partnership with the US and Turkey, especially on trade, to counterbalance the UK's loss of geopolitical impact post-Brexit? And finally, will the EU accept President Erdogan's olive branch in keeping with Chancellor Merkel's and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg's efforts this summer to decrease tensions in the Eastern Mediterranean? Or will Paris and Athens continue to press for confrontation with Turkey? I'd like to begin this initial session of questions by turning to Ambassador Jim Jeffrey. Dear Jim, what's your take? How do you expect US-Turkey relations to be shaped under the Biden administration without that sort of protector, if you will, of President Trump in place? Do you feel that maybe Washington and Ankara can overcome also the deep differences that they've endured on Syria and the US partnering with the YPG, PKK, as well as Turkey's purchase of S-400 air defense systems? And you have such a broad, deep background, also former Deputy National Security Advisor, also Ambassador to Iraq and Ambassador to Albania. So if you get a chance, or we can do this later in the questions, what are your thoughts on the US and Turkey kind of resetting, if you will, their relations with a focus on working together in the South Caucasus and the Black Sea in response to Russia's adventurism in those areas?
Matt, thank you very much. It's good to be here with you, with Daphne, with all the rest of you. First of all, I'm not optimistic, but I will start with the good news. But Matt has already summed it up. On a broad range of geostrategic, NATO, and other issues, the United States and Turkey have very common approaches and very common goals and interests. Thus, we should be getting along a lot better than we are, but we're not. I would say at this point, the relationship is at the lowest I've ever seen it since I showed up in Turkey in 1983. And it could get worse. There are four reasons for this. One is, and Matt mentioned the S-400. I cannot underline, I have done this 1,000 times with my Turkish friends and colleagues, how serious a existential issue the S-400 F-35 issue is for the United States' role in the world. Nothing Turkey has ever done, and I include Cyprus 1974, has dealt the same blow to relations, in part because, unlike Cyprus 1974, nobody in Washington can defend this decision. Conversely, there are two complaints Turkey has against the US that involve existential internal affairs. The US reaction to the 2016 coup and the refuge given to Fethullah Gulen up until today in America, and our work with a PKK offshoot, the SDF, in northern Syria since 2014. Now, America is innocent, both as a state, government, and individuals on the coup. America cannot legally extradite Fethullah Gulen, and the last of the United States ideas in going into Northeast Syria is to create problems for Turkey. Nonetheless, objectively, on something that's as sensitive to Turkey as the assault on the Congress last week was for us, the United States does not look like a good ally. So that's the first reason. Second reason, very quickly, is President Erdogan has shifted his approach to diplomacy. The guy who, when I was ambassador here, had sıfır problem, really good relations throughout the region and beyond now has almost Sifa Akadashla. That is, I think I may have put a lie on there. But anyway, Qatar and Azerbaijan and Bulgaria do not add up to a regional alliance for Turkey to work with. It is very, very isolated. We can speculate on why. That is simply a fact. Thus, Turkey's diplomacy punches way below what it could. The third reason is, and this is complicated, but it was around in the 1980s. It goes far beyond the individual issues in Erdogan. The buffers that normally protect relationships from turmoil are not there between us and Turkey. They never were. We've had other allies who are important and large and have their own interests. De Gaulle's France, I would argue very strongly, Merkel's Germany, which in the last of a whole series of things, going back to the Obama administration, weapons to Ukraine, the red line on Syria, has crossed American security interests now with the EU trade deal with China. It doesn't matter. Germany and the United States have institutional, personal relationship, and even ideological buffers that no matter how bad the issues are, get everybody emoting about how important it is to paper these things over. In Turkey, it's the reverse. There is a deep perception in Turkey across the ideological spectrum that the United States is just a revamped, more modern 19th century great power that acts like a great power for its own interest. And if it can screw Turkey or hurt Turkey's role in the world, it will do so. Why? Because that's what great powers do. In the United States, there isn't an across-the-board thing. There was a natural, all the way back to the 80s, set of forces and lobbies and other in the United States, there are too many to enumerate here, that were opposed to Turkey. The difference was, for many decades, they were balanced by another group of lobbies and interests, the US military, the counterterrorism people, the folks that really love what Turkey was doing in Afghanistan, what Turkey was doing with the NATO air defense system against Iran, people who were very, very happy with our military cooperation, and in particular, Turkey's relationship with Israel. Now that's flipped. Those people have also joined the cacophony of antagonism towards Turkey, and it is deafening back here, Matt. Finally, the last thing is, and the reason I'm a bit pessimistic, there's always a chance for a new beginning. The problem is, what helped the relationship during the Trump administration was not just a personal relationship, but it was Trump's worldview and those of the people around him, which saw great power competition to be critically important, and America's getting involved in, meddling in, lecturing other states about their internal constitution and organization was very unimportant. I'm not sure. There's a battle in the Democratic Party and thus in the new administration, whether they're going to focus on great power competition, which pushes you very quickly towards better relations with Turkey, or back to the same old, going into Iraq and Afghanistan in the Bush administration, the Arab Spring, shaping Iran through the JCPOA and everything else in the Obama administration. If that's the case, we're in for even more turbulent times. Thank you, Matt.
Wow, Jim, those are powerful insights. And yeah, this does go back to the Bush administration and beyond. I mean, traditionally, American foreign policy has been a balance of ideals and realpolitik interests. And it's a powerful insight that maybe U.S.-Turkey relations will have a smoother path if we're focusing more on great power relations. And that's a perfect lead into Sinan. But before I go to Sinan, I just want to remind everybody, again, we need, if you're going to ask a question, please don't submit it anonymously, okay? That we need to know who's submitting it and what your affiliation is. Thanks very much. So, Sinan, I would guess you would agree that, of course, Turkey looks at foreign policy from a great power perspective and, of course, assumes the U.S. does the same. And recently, it seems in a shrewd way, President Erdogan has realized that the Trump administration is finished. The Biden administration is going to be inaugurated. And that seems to have coincided with a shift in at least the tone of Turkish foreign policy as articulated by President Erdogan and Foreign Minister Çavuşoğlu. Whereas, in the summertime and even up through the Second Nagorno-Karabakh War, Turkey was very clearly pursuing a policy of asserting its its rights as it perceives them, and willing to endure confrontations, diplomatic, sometimes even slightly kinetic, like a collision of naval vessels in the Eastern Mediterranean. So you are, as one of the most astute observers of Turkish foreign policy and politics, what do you think? Do you think the shift in tone of Turkish foreign policy is more than that? Could it provide a sturdy foundation for a rejuvenation of a U.S.-Turkey strategic partnership? Or does President Erdogan think maybe the jury is still out and he's going to wait to see how the Biden administration shapes up and gets organized?
Thank you, Matt, for your most kind words. Let me try to at least give you some insights as to how I see the evolution of Turkish foreign policy and whether the assertiveness that we have seen in recent years is a permanent fixture of what Turkey shall look like now, a few years down the road, and 10 years down the road, or as you've insinuated, whether we are witnessing, a different tone regarding the conduct of foreign policy. Let me say what I'm going to say at the end, at the beginning. I think that what we see in terms of the growing assertiveness of Turkey is a permanent fixture. And it's been driven by a combination of external and internal factors. The external factors, again, very briefly, is one, the retrenchment of the United States from this region of the world. And this, as you would, be a much better judge than myself, is something that is a characteristic both for, Republican, but also Democratic governments, given that this is perhaps it reflects the soul of the American public opinion about how they see the U.S. role in the world. So that retrenchment it has consequences. And Turkey has been one of the countries that stood to take advantage of this lack of U.S. exposure and involvement in this regional theater. The second external aspect is that there had been an expectation that as the U.S. is withdrawing gradually from this neighborhood, that the EU would become the main actor as the main foreign policy partner of the United States in advancing the interests of the Western alliance. However, the EU's development in terms of becoming a more effective foreign policy actor has certainly not been, has not met expectations, and perhaps that's a euphemism. And therefore, the vacuum, the political vacuum in terms of a large regional power or a global power that's able to do the things that the US used to do in the past in terms of conflict management, conflict mitigation, and facilitation, is now totally absent. That's the external, if you want, environment where we have seen, a growth in Turkish assertiveness. There are also internal elements of it. The first element is that Turkey is indeed a country, when you look at different parameters of power, Turkey is a power on the rise, no matter which government is there. Different indicators, Turkey's large diplomatic network, its GDP, its international humanitarian aid per capita, its growing military might and technology, as Ambassador Jerry also mentioned. So when you look at all of that, objectively speaking, Turkey is a rising power. The fourth element, and this is becoming perhaps a bit more controversial, is that how the AK Party and President Erdogan encapsulated Turkey's rights. That, however, being a bit more problematic. The rhetoric around Turkey's rights could, in my mind, have been much less confrontational, much less aggressive. In that sense, I think President Erdogan needs a Bismarckian moment, and perhaps slightly longer than a moment. But the main challenge for Turkish foreign policy, and I think I'll come lastly to the US relationship, is how do we manage what I think is inevitable, and that's Turkey's rise in this region as a regional power. So there, the recent changes in the tonality of Turkish foreign policy is certainly to be welcomed. A more consensual, rhetoric, a less combative rhetoric that could still accompany the more assertive foreign policy when you look at it is what is needed. But the fourth element there that I think is instrumental to understand is that to some extent, the reason why we have witnessed this harsh rhetoric around Turkish foreign policy is also because foreign policy has been instrumentalized for domestic purposes to some extent. Mm-hmm. So this goes together and hand in hand with the political vision of making Turkey great again. And the way to demonstrate it to the local, to the Turkish population is to demonstrate how active Turkey is in the international realm, sometimes also as a party to ongoing conflicts. So that's the relationship between domestic politics and foreign policy is something that finally explains how Turkey acts in foreign policy. And on the US relationship, I think this is the context that faces the Biden administration. How to manage Turkey's rise? Obviously, you need Erdogan to tango as well. It's not something that unilaterally the Biden administration can do. But ultimately, I think I would summarize the challenge facing the US administration is this management of Turkey's rise, whether it's going to be very peaceful or whether it is going to be slightly more confrontational, as we have seen recently, like in the Eastern Mediterranean. That's the challenge facing the Western alliance and particularly the Biden administration.
Thanks, Sinan. Yeah, I couldn't agree more that Turkey, to a certain extent, is simply filling a national security or foreign policy vacuum that U.S. retrenchment has left. And in my microscopic view on this region, again, this recent war, the second one over Nagorno-Karabakh, it was clear that in July, when Armenian and Azerbaijani forces clashed on their international border, the U.S. and France, the other two of the three co-chairs of the mediating body, were not present. Who filled the vacuum? Turkey and Russia. So there are consequences to the lack of U.S. engagement. And yeah, a point well taken that Turkey's rise is a reality. It's inevitable. And maybe panelists and audience, we can think about whether or why in Washington and throughout European capitals, that seems to be seen a priori as negative. That change is seen as overly disruptive, and Turkey is supposed to just kind of follow the lead of the other countries that have traditionally led the transatlantic community. But maybe our challenge is to find a way to deal with this inevitable rise of Turkey and focus on what our shared strategic interests are, even if, as you said, Sinan, Erdogan's rhetoric is disconcerting sometimes and angering. So thank you. Keep those thoughts in mind, or at least I will. Now I'd like to turn to a dear friend, Ambassador Sir Peter Westmacott, who taught me a lot about Cyprus, as I was saying in the beginning. I've always said to my colleagues who are working on Cyprus, we should stay as close as possible to our UK allies, not only in a strategic sense, but in understanding the Cyprus question. But I'm not going to ask about Cyprus now, Peter. I just stumbled along a really great quote of yours today in the Financial Times in Phil Stevens' column, which was from Suez to Brexit, and it's about the UK and its own strategic retrenchment. What struck me about your quote is you say basically that the UK's strategic deterrent, its nuclear weapons, are really only usable together with the United States, in full coordination with the United States, and they don't really provide an independent nuclear capability to the United Kingdom. So it seems for a while, especially obviously in this post-Brexit world, that UK-US relationship has to be airtight from the UK's perspective, and trade's going to play a big part of this, obviously, of that relationship. But so is free trade and a trade agreement, the recent one with Turkey, going to be, I think, quite important to the UK, both economically but also geopolitically. So, given your experience as the chief of mission, both in the United States and in Turkey, not to mention France, is there a possibility or an advantage to the UK somehow helping to bridge or build some sort of a geostrategic and geoeconomic triangle among the UK, Turkey, and the United States?
Well, thank you, Matt, for having me on this panel. Thank you for the nice, easy questions. And it's a pleasure to be here, actually speaking from the house that I still have here in Turkey. So it's a measure of my attachment, my wife's attachment to this country, that we are here during the COVID lockdown, and we're locked down in Turkey rather than in London at this stage. So I think this is a very important opportunity for us to have this discussion. I was thinking as we began the discussion a little earlier on, back 15 years or so, more than that, when I arrived as ambassador, which was in fact nearly 20 years ago, that at that point, from the UK's point of view, we were pretty much on our own as we advocated the beginning of accession negotiations between Turkey and the European Union, provided Turkey met what we call the Copenhagen criteria for membership. Of course, it was up to the other member states of the European Union to decide whether or not Turkey should join. But this was a very important part of what the United Kingdom was trying to achieve. We believe that there was no geographical reason why Turkey shouldn't join. Cyprus, after all, was a candidate country for membership. And Turkey had, for a couple of hundred years, been talked about not as a country of Asia, but as the sick man of Europe, I seem to remember from my 19th century history. And has been a member of the Council of Europe and the European Convention on Human Rights and so on for a very long time. So this was an important part of my diplomatic mission, if you like, way back then. And it's worth perhaps remembering that, why were we doing that? What were the arguments that I was using to try to persuade other European member states that this was the correct policy? And it was that, Turkey was, at this point, I arrived in 2002, right at the beginning, a very important secular democracy in a turbulent world where democracy was in pretty short supply. The rule of law was there, freedom of speech was there. It was a very important NATO ally making significant contributions, which began, in fact, shortly after I got there in Afghanistan, largest standing army after the United States in the alliance. And of course, an important country in terms of addressing issues of radical Islamism elsewhere in the world, which Turkey was very aware of the risks of. And the United Kingdom still is, a guarantor power of the Cyprus issue of the country of Cyprus. And so we were very keen to somehow try to link the idea of Turkey joining the European Union to a settlement of the Cyprus problem. And it is a great sadness to me that we got to the point 16 years ago now, where in fact Turkey and Turkish Cypriots accepted the Annan plan for a settlement of the Cyprus problem, only to find that it was vetoed by the Greek Cypriot community, and nothing came of it. And then of course Cyprus joined the European Union as a divided island, but as a member state, which meant that thereafter many of the initiatives which anybody tried to take to try to resolve the Cyprus issue. I know you didn't want me to talk about Cyprus, but nevertheless.
No, I didn't want to ask you. Please talk about it.
We ran up against the concept of member state solidarity, which is an admirable principle within the European Union. Once you are a member state, once you're one of the 28, if you've got an issue with a third party, then the rest of the European Union will stand in solidarity with that member state. Now, that in a sense is a little bit of the background to your question. Do we think that there is scope for a different kind of a triangulation fast forward to 2020, 2021? And of course, member state solidarity, admirable principle though it was, and was one of the reasons why, in a sense, whenever Cyprus pleaded a national interest that was at stake, whenever there was a further initiative to try to address the issue of the divisions between the Greek Cypriot and the Turkish Cypriot community and the sovereignty questions, all that doesn't really apply in the same way to the United Kingdom. We have left the European Union, to my personal regret, but there are many of us in the United Kingdom who wish we had not, but we have. And so the United Kingdom will have a different status. It is still a guarantor power, as it happens, of Cyprus. It is not a member of the European Union. Does that mean that with the United Kingdom outside the European Union, and not at the moment anyway, planning to go back, and Turkey being an applicant member, but not anytime soon likely to join for a whole lot of different reasons that we can talk about, does this mean that the United Kingdom and Turkey in a regional way around the issues of Cyprus, but also bilaterally, might be able to form a significant new partnership. I think it might do. I'm not going to be rash enough to say the United Kingdom is going to immediately appoint a new special representative to try and solve Cyprus. My good friend and colleague, Lord Hannay, a very distinguished member of the House of Lords, spent 6.5 years with his wonderful opposite number, Tom Weston, from the State Department, trying to get us to a solution of the Cyprus problem. It failed, alas. The best efforts of the most marvelous people came to nothing. Will we revive that at some point? Well, I don't know. Let's wait and see what the foreign policy priorities of the British government in the years to come are going to be. But I think there are new, fresh openings. There is, as you mentioned, a bilateral free trade agreement negotiated very quickly between the United Kingdom and Turkey, coming into effect immediately after the UK leaves the European Union. It so happens that bilateral trade between Turkey and the United Kingdom is rising extremely fast. The United Kingdom is Turkey's second largest export market in the world after Germany, and it's rising fast, those trade in both directions. I happen to be the director of a company which has just made a significant 50, 60 million pound investment in the Turkish economy. So there's a lot of this sort of thing going on, which I think has been in some ways enhanced by the fact that the United Kingdom has left the European Union. And I think the potential for the two countries to do more together is very significant. So I think the background of the United Kingdom's strong support for Turkey's bid to join the European Union, if it met the criteria, is the background against which a new relationship, if you like, post-Brexit, can come into being and might be quite useful in terms of regional diplomacy and a number of the other issues in this part of the world, which both Britain and Turkey care about. I would add just a couple of other brief points. So Brexit, potentially an opportunity, therefore, building on the very strong trade and investment links. But I think that what will be very important in resolving the issues that Jim Jeffrey set out so eloquently, and his concern about the state of the US-Turkish relationship, it will be how are things going to evolve with the incoming Biden administration. And my hunch is that, particularly after the terrifying events that we saw on Capitol Hill last Wednesday, where there was almost armed insurrection, there was certainly extreme radicalism, and 5 people lost their lives. This is an administration which will be concerned about issues of human rights and of preservation of democracy and of values and principles and ethics in the relationships with other countries. That will apply to the United Kingdom, I'm quite sure. It'll apply to lots of others. And so I think I would like to welcome the speeches which President Erdogan has made over the last few weeks, saying, kind of recommitting himself, if I can put it like that, to a reform agenda, back to some of the very important issues which were the bedrock of the commitment the United Kingdom was making to helping Turkey reach the European Union membership if it met the criteria and if the other member states wanted it. Looking afresh at the whole Kurdish question, on which President Erdogan was very enlightened in those early years. And I think transparency and freedom of expression issues, which have been so important in the past, still are, but where Turkey has found itself flatly not accepting the rulings of the European Court on Human Rights, which I think is unfortunate and is a pity and is not actually very good for Turkey. So I think that will be important to making a fresh start with the United States administration. And it is an administration where there are plenty of people who know Turkey very well and are very fond of it. President-elect Biden knows Turkey well, knows President Erdogan extremely well, been here many times. Tony Blinken, our good friend, future Secretary of State, Toria Newland, Avril Haines, Bill Burns. A lot of these people have been in and around Turkey in the past and have got all the historical knowledge and background and integrity and talent to move these things in the right direction. I think that will be an important part of what Turkey's other friends and allies are able to do on the issues that you have just articulated. And you began by saying the United Kingdom and the United States have got a very important relationship which will remain key, and not just because we actually work so closely together with the United States on our independent nuclear deterrent. But I think the United States, United Kingdom will remain close allies, although there's some work to be done there because there's a new incoming president, and the last British government was quite closely involved with the outgoing Trump administration. There's work to be done there. I mean, don't pretend otherwise. But I think the potential is there for us to work together. And I like to think the potential is there for us to work together with Turkey in trying to find solutions to some of the issues which you and Jim have so eloquently brought to our attention. Thank you.
Speaking of eloquently, wow. A lot of gems in there to polish what you just said. But you answered a question that was in the back of my mind without me asking it, which is what's likely to be the response here in Turkey to President Biden convening a summit of democratic leaders early on, which is likely to exclude Turkey. And it seems like maybe President Erdogan has seen that there's a risk that as many people may view, as Sinan was saying, here in Turkey, the U.S. simply has a great power. This an ideal set of U.S. foreign policy, as we talked about with Jim, really does still matter. So if this can provide an incentive for these reforms in Turkey to continue, as President Erdogan has announced, just like meeting the Copenhagen criteria provided incentives for reforms in Turkey back when the EU accession was more alive, well, that's great for everybody. And I'm really glad you raised Cyprus, not just because it's such a fascinating issue, because it's a great transition to Minister Palacio, because the combination of the unresolved Cyprus question and EU solidarity of member states has led to a really difficult situation, at least this summer, with regard to the Eastern Mediterranean. And extreme level of tension and division even within the EU between Chancellor Merkel on one side and President Macron on the other side. Minister Palacio, we've heard the perspectives from the United States, from Turkey, as well as from the United Kingdom about US-Turkey and UK-Turkey relations. Well, what about from the EU perspective? How much hope do you put in these recent positive shifts in tone and in rhetoric, as Sinan was talking about, by President Erdogan recently? And how much do you worry that maybe that's not reflecting a profound enough change to get EU-Turkey relations back on track?
Well, first, thank you. And thank you for having me in this panel. And it's a great pleasure. And it's a great pleasure to be with all the Atlantic Council Turkish team on Turkey. And, I will try to respond because time is of the essence here. I will start by saying that I'm very glad that underpinning all the intervention, there is this idea that we have to go to realism on Turkish side, but on all sides. And realism means that when you speak about the European Union, and it has been said, at certain moments you speak about the European Union, at other moments you speak about the capitals. And of course, and solidarity is there, but at the same time, you speak at the different things. And it's clear, we are what we are. And sometimes even ourselves, we carry on and we expect more than we can deliver. And it's clear that here we have this contradiction, that we have common institutions and we have a common projection, but at the same time, from, I would say, Poland and Greece and France on the one extreme, and Germany and Bulgaria on the other extreme, you have all the panoply of different positionings vis-a-vis Turkey, as we have different positions vis-a-vis many things. Now, I would say that we also have to remember that there were different or differentiated positions on the Brexit issue. Yet there was a unified perspective. And I think that in the European Union, we take time to realize what is essential, what is vital, what is just an existential. And when we realize if something is existential, then there is a united perspective. This has been true with Great Britain, the Brexit negotiations, and of course, I belong to those that think that we lose a lot, us, the European Union, world perspective, especially in security, in foreign affairs, all that. But we are where we are and we have to take advantage. So first thing, let's be realistic about where we are. What do I think? I think that you have mentioned that after last week, we were in a different world. No, I think that this world has been there for a certain time, and that what has happened is that lately there have been catalysts that this new world has precipitated, and now we are confronted. But the new world was there before, and I think, and this is my first comment, is that the European Union will come together. As you know, there was a the European Council conclusions in the December. There will be a report in March. And okay, well, I hope that we go from this idea that unfortunately is very anchored in the perception around the world that the European Union talks, but then we don't walk the walk. In Brexit, we did. In Brexit, we did, and this is an important precedent. I think that we are going to see changes after March. Now, this is my first comment. My second comment is that we are examining the perspective from the Biden administration. So here, of course, for us, our relationship, European Union, let's speak for simplification, European Union, Turkey, is mediated by NATO and by transatlantic relations. And I was listening to Ambassador Westmacott explaining his own experience. While my own experience that I was very active in the run-up to the customs union and in the run-up to the 99 just engagement as candidate country, and in the run-up to the 2004 opening of negotiations. In each stance, I received personally this idea, the pressure from the United States to prod our European Union on our relations. It always backlash. So first thing for the Biden administration, I think that the Biden administration, the world has changed and they wouldn't, but this always backlashes. This idea, the European Union is absolutely aware that it's not European Union and Turkey in kind of different scenario, that we are enmeshed in all kind of relationship, but I would say this prodding by the United States, the European Union resents it. I would say that besides the customs union, the negotiations, we will come back to that later. I should mention on the European Union the 2016 agreement on refugees. This is very important in the background. And okay, the thing is that it has been said. We also have to acknowledge that while all this is the framework, the world has changed. It's not just President Erdogan, although President Erdogan and not that much Prime Minister Erdogan. I served in government with Prime Minister Erdogan and Minister for Affairs Gül. And Spain, I remember organizing seminars with our negotiators of accession and the teams, the Turkish teams, because Spain, and I mean, not just my government, but Spain is absolutely in favor as Great Britain of just bringing, there is an interest of the European Union to bring Turkey as close and if possible as a member. However, this doesn't mean that it can be done without Turkey meeting the criteria that are the criteria for membership. This is clear. But what we have to acknowledge is that Turkey has changed. Turkey is now you have mentioned this idea of the re-emergence of Turkey as a regional power, as a power that counts. It's not any longer this aspirational Ankara that just saw its future with the West, with the European Union. Turkey is now, in Europe, you will listen not this idea of re-emergence, but neo-Ottomanism. And this is how it is perceived. And this is something that we have to acknowledge and that we have to highlight what our interests are in common, understanding that Turkey in foreign affairs will have its own interest, and then frankly, that these foreign affairs, and in particular the relationship with the European Union, but also with United States, is for internal consumption. Let's be clear. This is one of the important drivers in Turkey, is public opinion, internal public opinion, and this just is not helping. Clearly, the way that President Erdogan has pushed in Libya, in these confrontational behaviors with vis-a-vis another NATO member, meaning France, the frigates just skirmish that we all know. This kind of aggressive behavior hasn't been, because of course the European Union has also a public opinion, and we are portrayed, the European Union is portrayed in Turkey as Islamophobic. I mean, frankly, it takes two to tango, and we should go to realism, to acknowledging that Turkey is now a regional power, at least hinged regional power, and that we should be able to establish a sound relationship that is not just based on we hold you because we hold the refugees, and this is kind of perceived as kind of blackmail. Let's call a cat a cat. I think that if you take a look at the webpage of Borrell, of the High Representative of the Foreign Affairs Minister for the European Union, you see that it is stated that the Mediterranean and Turkey are likely to remain great challenges, or the greatest challenges in 2021. But let's just welcome, if it's more than a like posturing, let's welcome this new declaration by President Erdogan. Turkey is going through difficulties, as we all are going through difficulties, economic difficulties, and this may be a kind of sobering process, but it also could be just a lapse before we go back to, we meaning the President Erdogan and the AKP go back in election mode. So to summarize, the European Union understands that we are not in an isolated, although we have specific ties, we are indeed with the United States. In that sense, the Biden administration is welcome. My opinion, it hasn't been mentioned, but my opinion is not that much the impeachment, and not that much this just summit of democracies. I think that this administration will pay a lot of attention and will be very concentrated on internal matters, on trying to solve what is probably the biggest challenge, that this is a country split in the middle. And so we need to factor in, as Turkey, as European Union. I mean, Great Britain, it's always a bit different because now that they are not any longer in the European Union, I think it's not a good news, but they have this special relationship that is a bit different. But for all of us, we have to take into account the social aspects of the United States that have, again, this has been a catalyst. They were there. And the way that it's not that I think that the word post-American world is not appropriate, or the expression post-American world, but we are in a different world. And it's true that I have written and said this, so I can say it again. The Trump administration has been very damaging for the international community, for the international institutional architecture, because the presidency of the United States was respected. You could be a friend or a foe, but you would respect the institution. Right now, it's very complicated. And of course, the events last week are very complicated. So we, on the side of the European Union, there are these voices that we need this strategic autonomy. I'm absolutely contrary. I think that this is a mirage. We don't have critical mass as European Union. We need to be together with the United States. This Turkey relationship is one of the areas where it's the proof of the pudding. And I hope that with this new administration, with which the Europeans have a much simpler, better, and I think that there were many bottles of champagne when we knew the results of the elections in the European Union, in all the capitals, and this was pervasive all over the European Union. So again, realism, understanding that the world is different, that on top of it we have President Erdogan, which is a factor, and that we have to highlight and to be able to work on what has been said, corridors, security, Iran, Gulf, Iraq, which are common interests. And the European Union will come together. Not easy, but we will.
Okay. Yes, definitely, Madam Minister. Not easy. And, part of the challenge for the European Union, as you were talking about at the end, is acting as a single actor with critical mass, right? And there is talk I've seen lately about maybe the EU developing that capability through shifting in decision-making methodology to a qualified majority. That might help. Yeah, but
this means changing the treaties.
Yeah.
I think that we have to understand that what we need is political will. When there is political will, there is a solution. Brexit shows it. We can be united behind a position. And frankly, nobody gave a dime for the European Union member states to just be a front line unified on these negotiations either. So let's see. Let's be optimistic.
Okay. Now we're coming up to the 1 hour point, 55 minutes. So we're going to extend this for 20 to 30 more minutes. I mean, I would like to give everybody, have a couple more rounds of questions, and especially with questions from the audience. And I'd like to pivot from, if that's okay. And by the way, if you have to go, you have to go, not the panelists, the audience. I'd like to pivot from what Minister Palacio was just saying to actually a question from my beloved former boss, our dear friend, distinguished fellow at the Atlantic Council, Dan Fried. It's to Ambassador Jeffrey, and it's the question I was going to ask you anyway, Jim. Dan is asking, how has Turkey's direction under Erdogan affected U.S. policy in the region? I mean, as Minister Palacio was just saying, the EU is approaching Turkey from a realpolitik perspective, with a sort of cool, rational perspective. Turkey's got to walk the walk and talk the talk. But then from Washington's perspective, as the minister said, we all personally pushed our European allies so hard for Turkey to get into the EU if it fulfilled the Copenhagen criteria. And Turkey, I think, has done some things that are seen as being negative, like supporting the UN-supported government of national court in Libya, or intervening in northern Syria. But in the case of Idlib, one could argue that was for humanitarian reasons. And on top of it, these novel, innovative Turkish drone-related technologies and tactics would seem to me to be an asset that's of great value to the NATO alliance. So how did Erdogan's behavior to date affect U.S. policy? And what about these other factors being able to get the relationship back on track?
Yeah, First of all, on Syria, with the exception of Northeast Syria, the U.S. relationship with the SDF and Turkey's reaction to it, which is a separate category, as I mentioned, our coordination has been close. The United States, from President Trump, and at least for us who are working on Syria, a famous tweet in September of 2018 on, have been very, very supportive in many different ways of what Turkey is doing in the Northwest to stop the onslaught of Assad, Iranian and Russian forces, and to essentially produce a nationwide stalemate, which is what we have today, and a very good thing. As you know, the United States also supported the Tripoli-based UN-recognized government, and there was considerable appreciation for Turkey's efforts, not to speak of its military effectiveness, stopping the Wagner mercenary-led assault on Tripoli. And even on Nagorno-Karabakh, not only the US, but I would say that certain other countries in the region were quite interested in that because they see Armenia as both a Russian and an Iranian ally. So, and throughout the administration, the Biden administration, rather the Trump administration, there was a real focus on realpolitik actions in the Middle East. And Turkey was seen by certainly President Trump and certainly Mike Pompeo as an ally. Two things got in the way. One was, it wasn't the internal situation in Turkey, specifically not to the upper levels of the Trump administration. But the first thing was, of course, the constant harping and friction over the US support for the SDF. And there were various efforts taken by us, at times with the Turks, at times unilaterally, to try to get that in a better place. We sort of succeeded in October of 2019 with the ceasefire on the 17th, but we have friction, frankly, right here today, and nobody understands why in Washington. The people who like Turkey, who understand why Turkey went in, don't know why there is still considerable low-level fighting. Nobody thinks, including anybody in Ankara, that Turkey can roll into the whole Northeast. You not only have American troops there, you have Russian troops. And the reason they're there was that Turkey went in. And we told everybody all the way to the top in advance that that would happen if they went in. So there isn't a way forward, and Turkey's in a pretty good place. They have considerable territory in the Northeast. They're in a position where they deal closely with us. There's not much of a threat from the SDF, which is facing multiple challenges: ISIS, the Russians, Assad, the Iranians, the unruly Arab tribes in the south. The second thing, though, is, and I alluded to it earlier, and in a way it reflects some of the things that Peter and Anna said, and that is the, and Dan Fried would understand this, the daily friction of having to fend off congressional, lobbyist, legal, and other challenges related to Turkey and the things it does that may or may not be justified, but we're done without coordination. We're done typically with a often insulting reference to the US position that may be different, that simply broke friendships and barriers rather than put them together. Again, I cite, because I spent as much time in Germany as in Turkey, the horrific things that the German public, the lowest support of NATO probably in any NATO country, the horrid contribution to their own defense and the various specific policies they've done. But they come through smelling like a rose because they have a whole system, and we have a whole system with Germany that works to paper things over even when they're bad. That system is the opposite with Turkey, and it just rubs the wrong way. So that despite Trump's personal relationship with Turkey, despite the fact that both the United States and Turkey worked very hard for a set of similar goals, often coordinated, a correct solution in Syria, containing Iran, pushing back on Russia, and defeating ISIS. Those all were shared, and often we cooperated together. It's a very mixed record, even under the best possible circumstances under the Trump administration, that could have cared less about the fate of, jurists in Turkey. Now we have a different administration, not as focused perhaps on realpolitik and more focused on just these kind of things. That's why I'm pessimistic.
Okay, very clear. And it's sort of that ties into what Sinan was saying before, actually, about how we do have the Turkey rising power pursuing its interests, which coincide with very many of our national security interests. But we get the tone gets in the way, and we don't have this mechanism to work through the emotionality. That's a lead-in for speaking of tone, a pointed question for you, Sinan, from Bethan McKernan from The Guardian. I'm just going to read it. I'm not going to try to edit it. You'll see why. And Anna, you may want to respond to this one, by the way. I'll leave some time for that. Sinan Bey, what do you think accounts for the EU's complete lack of ability to understand Turkish foreign policy in the last 5 years or to form a coherent stance? Are the frictions and tensions that erupted within the bloc over the East Med tensions last year surmountable?
Matt, if I may, I'm going to answer that question, but before, I just want to say a few words to complement what Ambassador Jeffrey stated, particularly on the future of the Turkey-US relationship under the Biden administration, because I also want to introduce some elements of optimism to the best that I can. And in doing so, I will do something that is perhaps intellectually quite debatable, which is I will assume that there are no legacy problems between Turkey and the US. For 1 minute, just assume there are no legacy issues. When we look at how the two administrations look at the world and the region, there are indeed today many overlaps. On Iran, for instance, the administration's policy towards Iran is something that is very much welcomed in Turkey. Turkey wants a diplomatic solution to Iran. Turkey is interested in all the other issues relevant to Iran as well, especially if there's a new track on controlling Iran's ballistic missiles program, possibly associating Turkey to a format like that, like the P5+1 in the past in some way or another. Libya, Ambassador Jeffrey said it well, we do stand on very similar ground there. Even Syria, again, let's forget the legacy issue, but even in the future of Syria, Turkey and the US are interested in stabilization, in a return of refugees, and if there is going to be reconstruction in Syria, that's going to be the EU and the US, not Russia and China. The strengthening of the transatlantic bond, you're not going to get there if Turkey does not feel that it is comfortable in the alliance itself. So when we look at it from that point of view, there are indeed many overlaps. Now, what overshadows this picture, as also discussed to some extent today, are two big problems. On the Turkish side is the S-400 issue, and I'm fully in agreement with Ambassador Jeffries. I think that Ankara has not fully acknowledged how big a problem that is for the bilateral relationship. Despite the messages of the US administration, which even there, I think there's some share to go around in the sense that these messages perhaps was not given at the right time, at the right level, at the beginning at least. And on the US side, the US relationship with SDF, obviously, these are the two big issues. So fundamentally, what we are heading towards, I think the Biden administration does not want to start on a sour note for Turkey. They would much prefer to have a sound, robust relationship with Ankara. Same with regard to the Turkish government. So what we're heading towards is the prospect of a grand bargain. Now, I'm saying this in all consciousness, and the itself is relevant. I'm not saying a grand bargain. I'm saying the prospect of a grand bargain. That's what we're heading towards. And if there is a grand bargain between Turkey and the US on the basis of all these common objectives, on top of which, the US volition, the US intention to work with regional partners in the world as they want to focus more on American society, which is a very laudable goal and commendable goal of the Biden administration. So if there is this grand bargain, then we are going to talk about a very different blueprint for the future of the relationship. But by the same token, for a host of reasons, if the two leadership, if the two governments fail in that grand bargain, then this is not just going to hinder the future of this relationship, but it will also have an impact on the Turkey-EU relationship, because now it is clear, and we saw this in the latest EU summit declarations, that the EU's outlook towards Turkey, that the EU's positioning towards Turkey is also going to be conditional on the future of the Turkey-US relationship. The EU wants to exchange and do parallel things with the US as regards Turkey. That can be an opportunity for Turkey. So redressing the US relationship would also help Turkey improve its relationship with the EU. But at the same time, it's also a risk, because a failure to do that with the US would also be inimical to the relationship with the EU, especially when we're talking about the future of sanctions. But just to go back to the original question, I think the reason why the EU never really embraced Turkey and really understood what it wants to do on foreign policy, also, to me, to a large extent, it's due to the internal divisions of the EU. Since the beginning, unlike some of the countries, and here Anna Palacio, I really need to commend her efforts over the years in trying to advance the Turkey-EU relationship. But despite these, high-minded politicians, there were moments in this history where we have seen clear rejectionism and clear rebuttal of a Turkish accession. And I think that ultimately was very inimical, because that happened, let's recall, at the time when Turkey itself was modernizing and reforming. So I think it's these internal divisions within the EU that we see time and time again. It's not just a matter of accession, even in foreign policy. The messaging on East Med, the position on Libya, even there are very clear internal divisions in the EU. Which makes dealing with a country like Turkey an overly complicated and complex issue, given that on the one hand, Turkey is an accession country, but on the other hand, and increasingly so perhaps if we are to believe the letter of the recent EU statements, increasingly so as a strategic partner rather than an accession country.
Okay,
Thanks.
I mean, allow me to respond briefly, because you know what, Sinan, you have spoken about, let's assume that there were no legacy. Well, I think that what we need, not to assume, but to work, is that there is more rationality. Realism means also rationality. But this plays both sides. I mean, the way you are absolutely right, and right? A certain time ago, because today it's much more complex, but there was, I would say, an imbalance. There was an irrational, emotional rejection more on the side of the European Union than on the side of Turkey. And I have been the first with many others. I think that Ambassador Westmacott can be counted, and many others that we have said, I mean, let's be clear, we are not being rational in analyzing, or you are not being rational in analyzing this. The problem is that today irrationality is behind Brexit. Irrationality is behind so many things. I think that if there is a responsibility of our authorities, of our politicians, of our public opinion makers, is to tone down, which is difficult, because in the end, today we are in this process of platforms, instant messaging, 240 characters, things that doesn't allow to nuance. And we need, especially with Turkey, you are right, but today's both sides. I think that it's not just grievances against the European Union Everybody has grievances. China has grievances. Russia has grievances. Turkey has grievances. Everybody has grievances. Okay, well, you know what? We have a history. We assume this history, but we need to project to the future. And in projecting to the future, it doesn't help to retrench behind preconceived ideas or to fuel this irrational perspective. I think that the case for Turkey today in the European Union is very hard. I have been booed in giving a talk and speaking about Turkey, booed in very surprising places in the European Union. We need to tone down. And this is where this kind of meetings, what Atlantic Council is doing, is fundamental. But I hope that the Biden administration, the responsibles there, I'm sure will play along these lines of trying to calm down. And I think that they will find in von der Leyen, in all the institutions in the European Union, and in many of the key governments, starting by Germany, this willingness. But of course, Turkey has to help. The incident with France, with the frigates, has been lethal. For the European Union, the positioning in Libya is very difficult to explain, although there, paradoxically, politics make strange bedfellows, but because France was also with Haftar and all this. So my comment to you is why in the last 5 years, I mentioned refugees is 2016. This is there, and this is a cauldron. They're simmering, and this just presents. It's not to be forgotten. But what is the other issue? What has happened in the last 5 years is that Turkey has consolidated as a regional power. And the good news. What are the good news? Is frankly that in NATO, for instance, we have many difficulties, and we need to address. And the S-400 and the news of the second contract of S-400 is complicated. But in general terms, we all understand that no other ally is more exposed in a region that is extremely complicated. And there we need to stand and to work. Iraq was mentioned, Iran, the Gulf, etc. And then many times we forget that Turkey participates in the NATO programs and is there. So, I mean, there are areas, and we tend not to speak about these areas that are of good news and to fuel this Islamophobia on the one hand, and this idea that we are going to be submerged on the other, which is, it's our challenge.
Yeah, Anna, that sort of encapsulates the whole point of this entire discussion, which is that there are these overlapping interests between the EU and Turkey or the US and Turkey, and they're often lost in the sort of conventional wisdom on each side of the debate, and a debate that often doesn't even happen, right? So I've got two questions that are very similar, and I'll turn to Peter, but anybody, you or anybody else also to answer, that pick up on this theme in the context of the Eastern Mediterranean. So one question is from Charles Elinas, our dear friend, who's also my colleague, at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center, and also one from Deborah Kagan, my and Jim's former colleague at the State Department. She's now a Distinguished Energy Fellow at the Transatlantic Leadership Network. So the question, or both of them, sort of boil down to, again, what Anna was just saying, the shared interests, including in the Eastern Med, but overlooked, and there's a tonality problem as well. So Charles observes that, okay, now the Greece and Turkey, together with the EU, are talking about resuming their talks. Turkey wants the talks to be sort of able to cover any issue. Greece wants to focus specifically on maritime issues. And in my experience with Cyprus, Peter, anytime the Turkish side or Turkish Cypriot side brought up energy, hydrocarbon exploration, this was a little bit after your time in Ankara, but nonetheless, anytime that was brought up, the Greek Cypriot side didn't want to talk about the use of energy potentially as an incentive for cooperation, because they saw it maybe as a lever that the Turkish side would use. against the Greek side. So do you see a chance now that the talks could and will resume, Greece and Turkey, that energy could be an element of those talks, and that the Greek Cypriot side in particular might agree with the Greeks to begin talking about maybe revenue sharing or exports of some of the natural gas in the Eastern Med toward Turkey, the largest and growing natural gas market in the region? If that's too technical, please broaden the scope.
Are you asking me?
To Peter and then to you, Anna. Yeah, I mean, or to anybody, but I'm sure you have views.
Let me let me have a brief comment about that. And I straight away say that I'm not an expert on Eastern Mediterranean energy exploration issues. But it is the case that over the last few weeks, in addition to recommitting, as I put it earlier on, to the reform agenda, that President Erdogan has said that he wants to look afresh and take a different approach to discussions with Greece about maritime boundaries and about energy resources in the Mediterranean. I think that's a very welcome message. We've had a little bit of saber rattling. We've had boats sent out to make certain symbolic gestures. We've had standoffs. It's not been very edifying. I think part of it may be, and I don't know as much about this as I should, that there are now very significant hydrocarbon reserves which have been discovered in Turkish waters in the Black Sea, which means that in terms of at least the value of those resources in Turkey's energy autonomy, that there is potential for very significant progress and wealth creation in the Black Sea. But that's, of course, slightly separate and doesn't replace the issue of the validity of maritime boundaries and how you work with your neighbors. Part of this is about the issue that I touched on earlier on, the unresolved territorial dispute over Cyprus, the unresolved issue between North and South, and therefore who the sovereign waters belong to, and the economic zones which go around the north and south of the island. But part of it is also unrelated to Cyprus. We need to remember that. This goes back to the problem between Turkey and Greece over the Dodecanese, the islands which are Greek, some of which are as little as 1 to 2 kilometers off the Turkish coast, and which were allocated after the Second World War to Greece in the way that we all remember. And this is an issue similar to overflights in the Aegean, which were a constant bugbear when I was ambassador in Turkey. Who has got control of the airspace? When is it legitimate for somebody to fly a flag, sail a ship, or send an aeroplane over an uninhabited piece of rock in the Aegean Sea? All this stuff needs to be sorted out on the basis of bilateral talks between Turkey and Greece. And I think that the messaging that has been coming out of Ankara has been encouraging. My guess is that the Biden administration will want to be very encouraging of that process. So I think something good may emerge from this. I wouldn't put it more strongly than that. I'm not sufficiently technically expert on the details of those negotiations to know whether that's a little naive and a little ignoring of what's really going on the ground, or shall we say under the sea. So other experts can comment on that. But I think the politics of this are a bit more propitious to progress rather than more standoffs than they were just a few months ago.
Great, thanks. Okay, so we are just about done. I think we have time for one more relatively quick response, and this is we'll just open this up to anybody. I think we need to wrap up in about 5 minutes or so. So this is from Ambassador Alper Coşkun from the Turkish Foreign Ministry. I'll just read it. The diversified, broad, and expanding nature of relations between Turkey and the UK is something missing in Turkey-US relations that are compressed into the prism of security and defense cooperation. Despite all challenges, including S-400, is there not a potential for diversification and broadening of Turkey-US engagement that could help buttress challenges and strengthen the basis of relations? I guess primarily, Jim, I guess that's to you, but everybody should feel welcome.
Look, the short answer is no. Here's why. I don't know how many times, Matt, I'm sure you were involved in them, we formed special commissions to improve the economic situation. The problem is both the United States and Turkey are for good reasons, capitalist, private sector-led market economies, where you have to look at your global relationship in terms of where you get your products, where you sell your products, and everything else. There are things that can be done to smooth trade. There are various levels of agreements. I mean, the most important from Turkey's standpoint, of course, is the customs union with the EU, and that has been a major factor for, frankly, the growth in Turkish UK exports. And as I understand it, that they've now done an agreement that will be able to continue this, and it's very important for both the UK and Turkey. Turkish trade with the US and US trade with Turkey is not particularly significant. I mean, the Trump administration, as part of its outreach, sent out the minister, the Secretary of Commerce, not minister, to pitch a $100 billion trade agreement. It's just, we don't know how to do this. We're not Putin. We can't send 1 million tourists to Turkey rather than to the Caribbean if we want to, nor, like Putin, can we turn them off suddenly and tell them they can't go to Turkey. We cannot decide we're going to buy all of our tomatoes from Turkey or, again, turn them off. That's the problem. That's never going to buffer a relationship as strategically important as that. It's not a bad thing to spend time on. I've seen us make significant breakthroughs in some areas. Now, there's one exception, and that is energy cooperation on the pipelines. That is something that for 20 years we did, beginning in the 1990s. That was an extraordinary complement to our strategic and diplomatic relationships. And we did a lot to stabilize the Caucasus region. We did a lot to diversify Turkey's energy supply. And we could have perhaps, under better circumstances, perhaps still today, see an Iraq role in all of that beyond what we already have with the Ceyhan pipeline. So that's an exception, and that's a good example of what you can do. Energy policy is different. Beyond that, I just don't see it, man.
Okay.
Well, a word from the European Union. I mean,
Please.
the TAP, which was fostered by the United States, but this is the pipeline that now lands in Italy. So it goes all the way. This is the kind of project that the ambassador is speaking about, and that is many times forgotten when we speak about the things. I think, and the ambassador has mentioned it, there is room to enhance, to negotiate around the customs union. And I think that this is realistic. It needs an attitude again, and this should be put in the basket. I see it easier as a first step than the other big demand from Turkey, which is legitimate, which is the visa issue. We have to rebuild this trust, and these are areas where I think that we should start working on.
Thank you very much. Yes, Sinan. Yeah.
Yeah, very briefly. I mean, just to follow up on Alper's question and Ambassador Jeffrey's answer, I think one area where we have not really explored is at some point, many of you would recall the TTIP adventure. So this, ambitious EU-US deal. At the time, Turkey was very interested in being part of TTIP because it would have actually done what perhaps Alper has insinuated, namely opened up free trade between Turkey and the US by virtue of Turkey also being, in the customs union with the EU. So I wonder if under Biden, there might be a renewal opportunity for the US-EU trade angle to be deepened, maybe not in the form of the original TTIP, but in some form. And that would actually provide the path for deeper Turkey-US economic integration as well.
All right, thanks, Sinan. I think it's time to wrap up. I'm sorry, I hate to end this discussion. I didn't get to all the other questions, but but may there be a transatlantic trade agreement again, and no more U.S. sanctions on our EU allies. And I'm so glad Anna brought us back to those pipelines. If it wasn't for those pipelines, I wouldn't be sitting here in the forest near the Black Sea in Istanbul. So thank you so much, everybody, for stretching everyone's minds, certainly mine. So many new insights, such clarity and elegance in the way you articulated your points. I wish every discussion could be like this. Thank you. I'd like to turn it over to Daphne for our wrap up.
Thank you, Matt, for this great moderation. And I would like to thank our great panelists once more. Wonderful discussion again. Very proud. And I also would like to thank to our participants. We had close to 1,000 registration today, and we have over actually 74 questions that we received. Unfortunately, we couldn't address all of them. We didn't have enough time in 1.5 hours that we tried to cover most of them. So until next time, thank you very much on behalf of Atlantic Council. So thank you. So long.
Thank you. Bye.